Can you start by explaining what this resistant starch is?
Resistant starch is just that. It resists the digestion in our small intestine. So basically, the enzymes that would normally digest starch aren't able to access resistant starch. They're not able to either penetrate the granule. So starch is actually housed in a granule. So there's maybe a hole or a husk or something that's very strong that the enzymes can't penetrate to get into the starch. Sometimes it's the configuration of the starch granules that prevent the enzymes from allowing access. But bottom line, because it's not digested in our small intestine, it doesn't contribute to blood sugar. So that's kind of the first step. I always say resistant starch works through your entire intestine, and it does. So that's where it helps with blood sugar, blood glucose, blood sugar I'll refer to. In the small intestine, but what happens is it enters the large intestine and it's intact. But the gut microbes love to ferment, certain ones do, love to ferment resistant starch, and that means they're just eating it, basically. So when they eat resistant starch or break it down, they produce these metabolites that also confer health benefit, that aid in additional blood sugar control and help with digestive health by maintaining the beneficial gut microbes in the gut.
So, what's an example of one of these resistant starches that we would probably eat in our diet right now?
Right, so there's actually 5 types, and we get 4 in our diet. So the first, we have resistant starch 1, which is found in nuts and some of our seeds and cereals. Resistant starch 2 is found in just ripe or green herb bananas, as well as our raw potatoes. And then our resistant starch 3 is found in those foods that are cooked and then chilled. We also get forms of 2 and 3 in things like beans and legumes and peas, as well as corn tortillas are usually a rich source. Corn flakes, of all things, are a rich source. So we really get resistant starch in a lot of those plant-based foods that are already naturally high in fiber.
So resistant starch 2 was a bit interesting because you said it was raw bananas and raw potatoes. I don't know anyone who's eating that. So how do we get that without eating those?
Well, you actually, even when I say raw, that has the higher amount. But when you cook that potato, it still retains the resistant starch 2. It's just, however, when you chill it, it becomes resistant starch 3. I know it's a little weird concept, but we still have resistant starch 2 when we do cook the foods and then eat it. But then once we chill it, it usually converts into a resistant starch type 3.
Yeah, because I do remember learning at some point that when you cook your vegetables, they're a bit different, the nutritional value of them. And fiber is what keeps the food stern, whole, correct? So when you cook it, does that mean that the fiber content decreases?
No, not the fiber. So resistant starch is a type of fiber, but it's really a separate entity than fiber that you would find naturally in food. So even though it's considered a fiber, we really want to talk about it as resistant starch. Even though it is a fiber, I know it's confusing, but it's kind of the way the government regulates our how we use the definition of dietary fiber in the United States.
So could you define dietary fiber for us, or the different types of fiber?
Yeah, so dietary fiber is basically just any undigestible carbohydrate that confers some health benefit, and it's always plant-based, basically. There are some functional fibers that have been manufactured by industry, and some of those are considered fiber as long as they meet the requirements of the government, as well as they have enough scientific research showing that it does impact some type of health outcome. So it can be classified as fiber. So we in the United States classify fiber as insoluble or soluble. So insoluble meaning it doesn't degrade in warm water, so it stays intact, whereas soluble is going to break down when we add warm water. However, even though that's on our nutrition facts panel, that doesn't mean that that's how it actually acts in our body. So what we really care about as clinicians and scientists is the physiological outcomes of these fibers. So we care about fermentability, whether or not the fiber can be fermented by our gut microbes. And then the other one we care about is viscosity. Is it able to form a gel and provide some kind of a bulking agent in our digestive tract? And those are two completely different physiological mechanisms. And so what we see is what some soluble fibers are going to be fermentable, and some insoluble fibers like resistant starch are going to be fermentable. Some soluble fibers will be viscous, whereas some insoluble will be viscous as well. So, you can't really say, oh, all insoluble fibers are going to be fermentable or or viscous, because that's just not the case.
So what does that actually mean for our digestive system, though?
So when we talk about certain types of viscous or bulking type of fibers, like cellulose is found in some of our over-the-counter products, and it basically just bulks the stool. So it allows for ease of defecation, so you can have less constipation. Psyllium fiber is one that is sort of a bulking, but also forms a gel in the GI tract. And so in that gel, it can trap certain nutrients like sugar, lipids, proteins, and remove them, and even cholesterol, and remove them from the body in the feces. So, and that also helps with the movement of the digestive tract, so helps with constipation again. So those bulking and gel-forming fibers actually pull water in to the GI tract, and that's how you get the different mechanisms associated with viscous and gel-forming types of fiber. Whereas insoluble is going to act at the gut microbe level. And as I described earlier, the insoluble fibers will be fermentable. Not all of them are fermented, but those that are fermented will feed off of that fiber and then produce the metabolites, especially short-chain fatty acids, that will allow for other health outcomes and benefits.
So fiber's relationship to the gut microbiome, is it technically the food for our gut microbiome?
It is, exactly.
Okay. I think I remember learning that. But if fiber is the food, is our gut microbiome choosy about the type of fiber that it's
Yes, that's right. So that's where it comes into, if the fiber is fermentable, then the gut microbes will feed off of it. But what we find too, some of the fermentable fibers are different in regards to how quickly the gut microbes break them down or feed them or, consume them for food, right? And they produce different metabolites. So it really is a very complex system. And you may have one gut microbe that feeds off of one type of fiber, and then another microbe likes to eat the product of whatever the initial bacteria formed. So it's very complex and dynamic. And so overall, though, when we talk about prebiotics, it confers benefit to the host, and it increases the viability and the amount of beneficial bacteria.
So it increases the amount of these bacteria, which would be in our microbiome, that would eat off of these certain fibers.
Right.
So that's how these prebiotics are helping us with digestion issues.
Right.
Okay. So could you describe the difference between a prebiotic and a probiotic?
Okay. So probiotics are the actual bacteria, the live cultures that you would need to consume, but it must be in high enough amounts in colony forming units, I believe. So, and typically if it's called a probiotic, then it must meet the requirements because those bacteria must survive the entire GI tract. Mind you, the pH of our stomach is around 2 or 3. So it's very, very acidic. So these bacteria must stay alive throughout the entire GI tract. And that's why they're in such high concentrations to be considered a probiotic, so they can reach the colon, the large intestine, where they can actually live.
Wow, I never knew that. So would you recommend someone should take both prebiotics and probiotics, or do you think one is greater than the other?
I would actually recommend a higher fiber diet first. And then if we don't see beneficial changes with a high fiber diet, then I would probably recommend both probiotic and prebiotic at the same time, because I don't think one is better than the other. You know, you have to have the food for the beneficial bacteria to thrive. And if that food isn't there, then you're not going to get a benefit. So if somebody's on a low fiber diet, but then they start eating and, ingesting a probiotic supplement, or even through yogurt or dairy product or some other means, then it may not have a beneficial effect because the food is not there.